Let all who desire wisdom walk in love. Beloved, giver of all wisdom, set for us this day the banquet of your word. Invite us to feast on the genius and beauty all around us. Then turn us in humility toward the poor, the oppressed, and all who struggle. This we ask in the name of your wisdom, then, now, and forever. Amen. Welcome back to Trinity Place in Geneva, New York. This is worship for the 18th Sunday of Pentecost. Greetings. This is a reflection on the readings for the 18th Sunday of Pentecost, and I couldn't help myself with that mansplaining poem. Because when I read it, I immediately thought of the chief priests and the elders waddling in mass surrounding Jesus and talking over him at 100 miles an hour. And then I realized, as I listened to it again, the Jennifer Militello's internal dialogue, and I closed my eyes trying to remember the times that I had provoked such thoughts for the women in my life. And then I went back to the readings and I conjured up the image of Moses as him mansplaining to God. God rolls the divine eyeballs and shoos Moses on down the road with the magic stick in his hand. Frankly, that poem has made me feel a lot more self-conscious about standing up here pontificating about things that you know as well as I do. Like, we're thirsty, needy little creatures who want so much more than what we actually need. When we come up short with what we want, we complain and wonder whether or not God's really with us anyway. Now, I could pad that Moses story with some other textual goodies, but that's the gist of it, don't you think? That we're needy little creatures who want so much more than we need. And then if we start getting more than we need, we start thinking of all the stuff we got, and we start thinking that all the stuff we got is needed instead of just gravy on top of whatever we really need. In other words, the more we get, the more our needs just grow and grow and grow, even though our actual needs are not really all that great. Well, anyway, I don't want to be mansplaining here, but I think that's the basic message of the Exodus story that we read, or at least what it's hinting at. Not to put too fine a point on it, but rather to summarize, one of God's creatures seems to have confused want and need and blames God for everything it wants but doesn't get. Then there's that gospel story. And here I think I can add some background that won't be mansplaining, but preaching it. And I think there's a difference between mansplaining and preaching. I sure hope so. The appearance of John the Baptist in the lectionary doesn't really tell the story. In Christian worship and theology, John appears only to make Jesus better and shinier and more grand. But John deserves his own story because it is an amazing story. And also, John was way more popular in Jesus' day than Jesus was. John had more followers, which is probably why the gospel storytellers cast him as a shadow of himself in the presence of Jesus. Anyway, John was a prophet who was at odds with the temple. Not just the building, but the whole temple system. You see, the Judaism of John's day was a monopoly religion. It was all about purity, about keeping oneself ritually pure, and when unavoidably polluted by the world all around, subjecting oneself to the many ritual acts of cleansing and purchase of sacrifices to be restored. The temple and the temple clergy were absolutely necessary to the process of staying pure. Only the temple clergy could conduct the sacrifices and pronounce people cleansed. And only after they had performed certain necessary rituals. And those sacrifices and some of those rituals had to be conducted in the temple and nowhere else. In short, to be faithful to the religion, one had to subject oneself to the entire temple system and be faithful to the hereditary dynasty of clergy running that system. They were a royalty of sorts and financially much more well off than the standard in that time and place. So it was a religious caste system, and the temple minions regulated and controlled who was in and who was out. Enter John the Baptist. He created an alternative to the temple. He was a disruptor, as we would say today. He entered the market and that had long been controlled by the monopoly and provided a cheap alternative for restoration. He railed against the temple system and called them corrupt. He pointed to the hypocrisies of the temple clergy and the king himself. He spoke out loud about the double standards for rich and poor and provided baptism as an alternative to those who could not afford the temple religion. By the hundreds and maybe thousands, people came out to the Jordan River to be baptized for the forgiveness of their sins. They didn't have to buy animals for the sacrifice at the temple altar, nor spend days or weeks at home while performing temple-mandated rituals to cleanse themselves. They went to the river instead, and John baptized them and preached about the time when God would bring about a reckoning against those in control, not just against the corrupt temple clergy, but against the corrupt king too, and against the Roman Empire itself. The temple, you see, because of John, was losing market share and income too, because John was giving away what they were selling. King Herod had him executed because John challenged his authority. After Herod cut off John's head, the people grieved and grieved hard for John. So that's why Jesus' challenge to the temple clergy and elders was so difficult. Was John a prophet sent from God or not? Oops. They can't answer that one without either alienating the crowd or pronouncing themselves guilty. I think we may have some of that disruption going on in religion today. I mean, after all the clergy's sexual misconduct and the obvious hypocrisy of institutional religion and our history of participation in slavery and genocide and segregation and the persecution of GLBTQ folks, not to mention resistance to science, the temple and its clergy lack credibility these days. Secularism itself has eroded the authority of the church and clergy to the point that I do not assume that you think you need me to make the bread and the wine, even though the church continues to insist that you do. But I'm old, and I won't be around to fight that battle. But I will keep raising up the issue embodied in that Moses story, that we are deeply confused about the difference between what we want and what we need. We do not need cities of millions in the desert where there is no water, even if people want to live there. We do not need pesticides on grapevines if it's going to wash into our water table and ruin our water, even if we want to drink wine. So many things we want that we do not need, and that we need to keep reminding ourselves that we do not need. I do not think it is mansplaining to keep picking at the difference between what we need and what we want, even though it may feel uncomfortable and it may be disagreeable and it may drive us to distraction. The church will have to fend for itself in the coming disruption that harkens back to John the Baptist. But on this ornery issue of want and need, I'll keep preaching. But I also keep wishing you the peace of God. Be always with you. Well, all right, Lisa.